And welcome back. The gang continues. By the way, there's a group that is telling you here that, for example, there's a friend of mine called David D saying that Justice Chacha Mwita ruled that deputy governors, just like other state officers, are entitled to a house or housing allowance provided by the state. His ruling was not specific to the deputy governors. And so he says members of parliament have a right to say us too.
And that's exactly what I clarified.
We say the such.
But is there something that SRC should have done as a result of that ruling? Because it seems to me
there
that
were three orders.
The confusion here is that there is a ruling that has been made in October of 2018. There is a Gazette notice of 2017, which as we stand doesn't appear to have been repealed by a new Gazette notice.
There was a judgment by Justice George Odunga on the same, but SRC tried to seek stay orders, which they didn't get, but all the same they appealed that matter. So it is still pending.
Nonetheless, Francis, in that Justice Chacha Mwita ruling, he had three orders. Of course, the first one was the one you've stated. But then he directed SRC to set and review the allowances for the said state officers. And that would mean, in line with his findings and his ruling, would it have been difficult to wait for the SRC to then set and review, which would then have a new Gazette notice that would then render the 2017
as
one
the only body
in law. And even just to follow,
and if there was a delay, maybe the MPs would
to court.
PSC would have been in court now saying that the SRC actually has refused to implement a court order.
There was also an allegation that SRC was silently, what you say, chini ya maji, trying to cut a deal with the deputy governors just before this decision was made, telling them, okay, you guys, notwithstanding the court decision, we can allow you to get housing allowance. The long and short of it is, I think SRC has an opportunity now to come clean and say, this is the position. This is what members of parliament are entitled to, and this is what they deserve. Maybe do a job evaluation for all state officers and say, for these people, this is what they deserve.
How about just publishing something that says, hey, there's too much talk out here. Here is what everybody earns. These are all their allowances. Then we can engage with that and have a conversation. Because they are very quiet. They're saying, oh yeah, there's a court case. But the court case is on a very specific, narrow issue of house allowance by members of parliament. But there's an entire debate going on out there about what exactly everybody is earning. This Me Too thing, they need to bring it out and say, hey, this is what the salary of MPs is. This is what governors are earning. This is what those independent constitutional commissions and
CSS,
whatever.
Everyone.
And Linus, this is an interesting discussion in the context of we all agree as a country, us included here, that the wage bill is almost unsustainable. 700 billion plus, and it is going to increase in the financial year 2019-2020, is simply unsustainable. That we are spending more money in remuneration than we are spending in development is a challenge. But look at it. In the budget of 2019-2020, a 3 trillion shillings budget, Parliament entirely, salaries, operations and everything included, is about 38 billion shillings. So even if you were to say, let's do away with Parliament entirely, you will save about 38 billion shillings. But it does not in any way deal with the 700 billion shillings that we're talking about. So wouldn't we then be asking that let's look at the discussion in its totality and look at where the real burden, where the real mzigo is? Notwithstanding the concern that you have about members of parliament.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, punguza mzigo, which is why it's going to start resonating. Because for a start, the 416 members of parliament, and I mean both the Senate and the National Assembly, are starting to look and feel literally like mzigo because of these demands. You talk of 38 billion shillings being a drop in the ocean, and I think it's the reasoning that has been faulty all along in the country. You hear members of parliament saying, no, but it's not much. I remember that the issue of increasing the parliamentary seats to be compliant with the gender rule. And the argument was, oh, it's very little money. What is little money?
It's a lot of money, as long as it's taxpayers' money.
You walk around and see where priorities are. Do we want to spend 38 billion shillings on remunerations of members of parliament, or do we want to prioritize that to other sectors of the economy? This is a country that still goes with kids that don't have classes. They are still studying under trees. You saw that in Kilifi. There's another one that was done in
Turkana as well.
In Turkana as well. What are we talking about? Starting to split it and say we are a 3 trillion economy, and out of that only 38. The members of parliament are wrong when it comes to that, which is why punguza mzigo will start looking very appealing for a start. Parliament being the first stop, and I think, Joe, you saw the proposal. It's about reducing seats to 147, way down. By
100 in the National Assembly, 47 in the Senate.
Talking about punguza mzigo, I looked at the bill that has been prepared by Dr. Ekuru Aukot and his team in the Third Way Alliance, and they have even done some computation. They're saying, for example, if we reduce the size of parliament, we will save 155 billion shillings every year. That if we abolish the positions of deputy governor, we are going to save 5.6 billion shillings. That if we adopt a one-term presidency, we are going to save 20 billion shillings every year. That if we cap salaries for members of parliament at 300,000 shillings and for the president at 500,000 shillings, we are going to save about 20 billion shillings. And that by automating the voter registration, that is... we are going to save about 25 billion. And automating general elections, we are going to save about 50 billion shillings. And restructuring independent commissions, about 16 billion shillings. And that if we severely punish thieves of public money, we will save about 3.5 trillion shillings. Maybe this is where the discussion is.
I think so. We can go into some of the details of it. And you see, this bill is not just about reducing the numbers, of constituencies and members of parliament. But when I went through it, there was just, a whole sort of summary of the highlights I put together. So number one, it empowers the Auditor General's office. Remember, it says that the DPP does not necessarily have to wait for investigations, and they can simply take those who have been adversely mentioned in the Auditor General's reports and ask them to step down. They also have strict timelines for corruption cases, right? They should be concluded in 30 days and appeal in, is it 21? They're empowering the Senate. Remember, they're saying it should be the upper house and giving it some more functions. A life sentence for corruption without a presidential pardon. Also, saving money in terms of the process of registration of voters, because they say every person who attains the age of 18 and acquires a national ID should be deemed to be a fully registered voter. I mean, we shouldn't have to go through the process once again of doing so. Also, saving money for investigations of the DPP, and also encouraging some openness and accountability there, because they require them to sort of publish this. So it's wide ranging.
Yeah, I mean, for me, some of these things obviously are things that we surely wouldn't need. We don't need to go for a referendum to know that it makes better sense for us to just deem you as a registered voter just because you have an ID, because that ID is given by the same government that certifies that you're now old enough, you're an adult, which is the same requirement that is there for you to vote. Secondly, I think that unfortunately, however brilliant some of these proposals seem to be, this will have to contend with what truly constitute our politics. We've talked about corruption and all these things fighting back. This will contend with greed fighting back. It will have to contend with tribalism fighting back, and all of those things. Can you imagine, for example, when we say that we're going to reduce the number of constituencies to the number of elected members of parliament to
47.
94, and then of course nominate 6. So 94 means, according to this, that we'll have 2 elected from every county, a man and a woman. So in that county,
you've dealt with the gender question.
Yes,
you have dealt with the gender question, but where is this man or woman going to come from in that constituency? Because I mean, that county, which community? Because if you take a community, a county, for example, like Narok, where he comes from, there are many ethnicities there. If you go to a place like Migori, for example, you have 2 or 3 communities there. So people will be saying, Nasisi. So the constituencies kind of took care of that. So we have to completely disabuse our minds of this idea of our person, our man, and whatever. And that is going to be a very, very tall order. Finally, it will contend with the very entrenched forces that is the current parliament, because there's a role that they will play, even if the referendum can go on without them, but there's a role they will play when they go to the ground. They'll start saying, unajua watu wanataka kuchukua hii constituency, tumepewa nini? So there's a whole political dimension to this that I think Ekuru Aukot and everyone else who supports this punguza mzigo will really have to contend with.
In fact, that's why I want to introduce Yvonne and Linus too. Speaking to Paul Mwangi, the Joint Secretary of the Building Bridges Initiative, he tells me out of the 30 plus counties they have visited, one principal submission has been, you reduce the size of our government, reduce the number of constituencies, reduce the number of counties. However, the rider is, don't touch ours.
But not ours.
Yeah,
not ours.
Everyone is
punguza lakini si yetu.
Punguza huko
Because
lakini
if you remember in Naivasha during the constitution making process, there were what you would call crazy suggestions that let's have 98 counties because every district then wanted to be a county. You see regional and ethnic reasons being advanced that sisi na hawa hatuwezi kupelekana. You cannot, for example, people would argue that the Rakanithi and Meru, no. Vihiga and Kakamega, it does not work that way. In fact, I even remember there was a heated discussion whether Kuria should be a county on its own or whether it should be part of Migori County. So whereas it sounds very nice, wherever it sounds, though it sounds very nice, that's let's punguza mzigo, the reality on the ground may be a bit different, Linus.
Yes, it's going to be a tough conversation. Definitely a very, very tough conversation. Because first of all, it'll run into the political headwinds of different interests. I remember when the Legale committee was going around to
boundaries delimitation.
Yes. And the issues were very parochial, for lack of a better word. You find that there are people who felt for a long time they have not been ably represented. They have not been able to send their sons or daughters to the National Assembly. And they see the delimitation of constituencies as an opportunity to be treated equally. So that's going to be a very, very difficult conversation for a start. Secondly, will be the political class. You are talking about the current sitting members of parliament, 416 of them. This is going to be a very tough constituency to convince. You are telling them, out of all the seats that you have in your county, there'll only be 2 that can bring you to Nairobi, and 1 more that can make you the boss of the county. You reduce that drastically. It's going to be very difficult. But one notable thing that must be really commended here is how the punguza mzigo bill puts down all the issues.
And
it throws in so much. And I think it was very smart of the drafters because they are introducing so many proposals that in the event of negotiations, they'll not leave the table. There'll be some give and take. They'll have a lot to give, and they'll have a lot to take.
And they're touching on things that tug very closely to the hearts of many Kenyans. When you talk about reducing the bill and the wage bill, and they even have numbers there, they're talking about corruption. Like, hey, these things are endless. Can we just restrict it to 30 days? We are done with this. If you have something to say, an appeal, 21 days, we are done with this thing. I mean, that is a sweetener. So there are people who might not have any feeling about many other things in there, but it's thrown in a few things that might entice all manner of
people. That is the ideal situation. The reality of it is, even currently, whenever the fight against corruption is up, you will hear sentiments like, hey, mtu wetu anaonewa, we are being targeted. It's not, you will hear people say, we want corruption fought, but it is only to the extent that corruption is being fought
on the other person,
not you.
But here's what I find interesting with it, and I think I'd said this at the beginning about empowering the office of the Auditor General. I mean, you know, the Auditor General releases report after report, and then we all just get shocked and tisk, and, you know. But he does say that the accounting officer whose department is cited in the annual Auditor General report having not accounted for public money or fails to prove value for money shall be requested to immediately vacate office. So basically what they're saying is it's very easy to just act directly from the Auditor General's report as opposed to, going through investigations and a process which is part of what takes a very long time. Here's the other argument I saw people engaging in on Twitter, especially when he was on Newsnight the other night, and people saying, oh, but this is the man who gave us the Constitution, he should not say it. I mean, let us clarify the role of the Committee of Experts. They didn't write the themselves. Remember, they went around the country, they gathered resources. Essentially, what they did was put all of this together and said, here's a document based on all the things you have been saying, and we then voted on it, knowing full well that, we didn't like 100% of it.
Even if they did, I mean, like, it's been 9 years, almost going to 10, so obviously, I mean, you can even do something and then you say, wait a minute, actually.
And now is when you test it.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight always has perfect vision. So I think that there's a sense in which we are also sometimes being unreasonable. But like Linus was mentioning, I think the most interesting thing is that this guy has given us something to talk about, something to discuss, where we can be saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about the other thing? And that I think is a culture that ought to be encouraged in the country, where conversations are substantive, their own issues, things that you can put on the table and disagree or agree about them, and that sort of thing. And it's something that I think we will hope to see in the coming days. All these people who have been talking about different ways of dealing with the Constitution and whatever.
And I hope we do this a little differently from pre-2010, when we said that so-and-so ametusomea katiba so iko sawa. Because that is the exact type of disinformation that these MPs will use. So whether, they pass it or not, whether it passes or fails, according to Article 277, it still goes to a referendum. However, if those MPs then go and start saying this is not, and I
think that's an interesting thing. I mean, one of the things that our Constitution did, which I think was quite interesting, and it was based on the mistrust that we had for all these people, is that the most interesting thing, that actually a referendum happens in spite of what Parliament thinks, which is very interesting. So for Ekuru Aukot, if he's able to meet the 1 million signatures he has, if there are no cows or whatever, cuckoo prints and whatever, if the IEBC can actually ascertain that there are 1 million signatures, his next battle will just be the majority of the county assemblies. And once that is done, you can be sure it's going for a referendum, because whether it passes in Parliament or not, it still goes to the referendum. Absolutely. And that's a very interesting.
I've seen some of the reporting today indicating some positivity on the part of county assemblies. There is a lot of goodwill because of the sweetener, one of them that you mentioned, which is make, instead of CDF, give the ward funds.
And the wards are not being touched, by the way. It's not reducing any ward. Is saying the wards are fine, let them stay.
It's the constituencies and everything else.
And this sounds good. It sounds really good economics. So that you have the national government and the county government. And under the county government, you also have resources going directly to the wards. It cuts off what many people have been saying, and I've actually been in agreement, that CDF should not be there.
It's a redundancy.
It's a redundancy. You shouldn't have a member of parliament going around with some fund. They should be in parliament making laws. They're not governors. They're not ward representatives.
But there's a question therein. If you say ward development fund, who will take charge of that ward development fund? The MCA?
Because if
it is the MCA, then it also negates the very principle of separation of powers, because a member of the county assembly, just like a member of parliament, has three functions: representation, oversight, and legislation. So if you're giving an MCA a certain amount of money as ward development fund, how will they manage that fund?
But at the same time
playing an oversight role in the county?
We experienced the same challenge with CDF, which is why it was removed from their control. They do not.
Yeah, even today in that statement they were saying, no, we don't have control of CDF, even though we know they have. But that control is notional. It's really not written in law. We just know MPs are powerful, so they can kick people around. But the law actually does not give them that direct power over CDF, which I think is something that we can do even with that ward fund, so that the MCA is not directly in charge. As a matter of fact, the MCA will be oversighting it to see that it actually does what it's supposed to do.
Away from the MCA, I think there's one elephant in the room in the bill, which maybe we just need to quickly talk about. A 1 year
the one term.
7 years.
Yeah.
7 years of the same person. That is how many short of 24 years?
but Linus, that can also
that can be contested. He says once we are done with the 7, you just go. We don't want you again.
No, it can be contested because we've had presidents serving for 10 years. Kibaki did 10. Uhuru is on his second term and he's doing 10 also.
He's already done 7.
He's already done 7. So 7 years may sound correct to many people because, you have an opportunity to do that which you want to do within a bulk of 7 years. Yeah. And also, I hear the argument by Dr. Ekuru Aukot and his team is that you want to deal with the question of contested elections every time there is an incumbent on the ballot paper, that we will know that, Joe, you serve 7 years and you're not seeking re-election, so you're done.
But isn't the higher contestation during an election at the end of the term of the incumbent, like 2022?
Not even that.
Is it as contested?
I think his point is that an incumbent doesn't lose. So if they are looking for a second term, most likely they are going to try and win.
But let me just point out something. In 2013, we had a contested election, bitterly contested. There was no incumbent. There were new candidates on the ballot.
Was my point, yes.
There is this escapist thing that we keep doing in every proposal, and I see punguza mzigo doing the same, which is to run away from the electoral questions. The issue here has never been about the term. It's about whether we vote, count, tally, and announce the results properly. Because now what we'll have a candidate who goes in for 7 years, but leaving behind a very contested election. We need to address the issue of how we conduct elections.
Electoral justice.
And on that issue, whether it would be this or whatever might come out of the Building Bridges initiative, with which IEBC? This same one? That literally all of the political players have raised issue with. They did their self-audit. A number of people were unhappy with it. Look at how they conducted themselves in 2017. Many still raising questions. Is it 4 of the commissioners, who resigned? So are we trusting this current IEBC, as is currently constituted, to be able to conduct this referendum or any other that may come in a manner that would satisfy everybody? We're still, there's still a lot of questions that have been raised.
That's a whole show, I think.
I know, isn't it? But here we are moving in this direction without sorting out IEBC itself.
The bottom line is, what would it take for us to have an IEBC that we can trust? Because, we have changed IEBC members from time to time, and it doesn't seem to solve the problem.
It's a question of influence, Joe. If either way, regardless of who appoints the commissioners, there will be a level of influence, right from procurement of electoral materials to the processes. There will always be some level of influence. I've had suggestions, for example, that political parties be given an opportunity, depending on their strength in parliament, to nominate commissioners in IEBC. That, some people have argued, is akin to 2 teams or 3 teams that are playing, deciding on who will be the referee.
Where would third way align?
But in all fairness, I don't think IEBC has entirely been responsible for everything that goes wrong in elections. There's a lot of political interference. In the last election, somebody died. How do you conduct the election after that?
That's right.
By the way, and there's also another bit.
It didn't just die.
There's also another bit that we may never be able to run away from. While we are discussing the punguza mzigo bill by Ekuru Aukot, there's also the Building Bridges initiative. The Paul Mwangi team is supposed to submit its report by the end of September, early October. And there's always this feeling that the BBI team has tried to fight off, that it already has an answer, so it is taking us through the process of finding the equation.
BBI?
Yes.
And that is a good place to end it. Food for thought as we